Good morning, everyone, or potentially afternoon for folks who are on the East Coast. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Carrie Rogers. I am the executive advisor at PsychArmor. I'm a clinical psychologist and am really thrilled that you're all here. I will be kind of moderating today's discussion. And we just want to welcome everybody to the conversation. I know that we're going to have people continuing to kind of come on for the next 2 or 3 minutes. But I wanted to go ahead and start on time because this is one of a series. And last week, Lindsay and I were on and we had quite a full conversation. And so I worry if we don't start, we will not get in as much conversation and dialogue as we want to. I'd love to start with some housekeeping. So we have a visual just to guide everybody. This is the PsychArmor community of practice. And first, we want to really acknowledge everybody's presence here on the call with us today. Those of you who are joining us, I want to acknowledge the other people who are joining me for conversation today, Lindsay and Andrea. This is a interesting time, and we are going to be talking about LGBTQIA plus members, their service, and also how to really provide the best, most inclusive, most human-centered care we can as healthcare providers. And, we are in an environment right now where that's a little bit tricky. So we wanted to do some housekeeping around our conversation today. We want to make sure that we allow everybody's voice to be heard, that we're really thoughtful about the way that we talk about this. We're respectful of everybody on the call. We have a prime directive when we do this here at PsychArmor that I'm going to read to you that I think really encompasses the tone that we're trying to set. So regardless of what we discover, we understand and truly believe that everybody did the best job they could, given what they knew at the time, their skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. So we want to go into this conversation really with that positive frame for everybody who's joining us today. I also want to invite people to be open about the things that they want to ask questions about. We want this to be a dialogue. Andrea and Lindsay and I will be talking, and I'll be asking them some questions today. Andrea and Lindsay have been generous to be here with us and share their voices and share their experiences. And we're here so that people can learn. And so it's really okay to ask questions. It's really okay to wonder things. We are going to also assume that everybody here is doing the best job that they can and trying as hard as they can and comes to this with an open mind and an open heart. We also want to acknowledge that everything's changing in the world right now, and things that we talk about today may look really different tomorrow and the next day. And so we're all kind of just doing the best that we can. With that said, and as I see people kind of coming in, and again, I'm sure people will still be joining us in the next few minutes. I want to do a quick introduction of our panelists. Lindsay Church is joining us today, and she and I have been kind of partners in this effort, and we'll be doing a couple more of these over the next few weeks for folks to join us. Lindsay's the executive director and co-founder of Minority Veterans of America, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that's dedicated to creating, I'm reading, so you all see me reading on the screen about, I don't want to screw this up, so I want to get your bios right. It's a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that's dedicated to creating an equitable and just world for minority veteran community, veterans of color, women, LGBTQIA plus, and non-religious minorities, so all minorities. Andrea is joining us today. Andrea is an Lindsay is also a veteran, I should say. Andrea is a Air Force veteran, and she's a social worker who has extensive advocacy experience. She's worked with diverse and marginalized veteran populations for a really long time. Lindsay is the Women, Veteran, and Underserved Populations Coordinator at MVAA. Did I get that right, Andrea? Or I'm sorry, did I just say Lindsay? Andrea. Lindsay has multiple jobs now. Oh my gosh. Lindsay didn't even know how busy she was. Andrea, my apologies, Andrea. I'm
That's
juggling
okay.
too many screens. Andrea is the Women, Veterans, and Underserved Population Coordinator at MVAA. So I got that right. Okay, good. And I just really appreciate you both being here and joining us for this. Do either of you want to add anything about yourself or about your kind of hope for today? I want this to be a pretty open and engaging dialogue, and so you are welcome to unmute and speak at any time. We also want to invite the audience, the people who are here with us, to put things in the chat whenever you have questions or comments. We have somebody who's watching that chat. Lindsay and Andrea and I may not be able to see it as well just because of the way that our screens are set up, but somebody at PsychArmor is watching that chat. I think we would like to know your questions when you ask them, so you don't have to hold those to the end. It's a more effective dialogue if we can answer questions as things are coming up for you. So, Andrea, Lindsay?
I'll just add that I love Q&A. So if you're here and participating, please drop your questions. I'm in educator mode, so I'm happy to answer any questions, even if they're uncomfortable or you feel like they might not be, big questions or whatnot. Please do ask them. This is the best time that you can ask any questions that might be burning or you might not have, have the understanding that you'd like about something. So please drop them in.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, as a social worker, one of the things that has rooted me in my whole career is meeting people where they're at. So, anything that you can ask, especially if you don't feel comfortable, maybe in other spaces, this is a space to do that.
Right. So we're going to assume good intent on everybody's part. And so I think that's what you're hearing from Andrea and Lindsay. It's okay to not know something. It's a great place to ask. So we really are wanting to talk about creating culturally affirming care. What does that mean? How does that really bolster dignity and safety for people? I think as healthcare providers, that is a big part of our job. So how do we do that? I want to ask our participants in one word, just to get everybody involved with us so they're not just watching us the whole time, Andrea and Lindsay. In one word, I would love to invite folks who are participants to put in the chat what affirming care means to you. What does that concept even mean? When I went to graduate school, which was back in the day, we didn't really talk about affirming care. Those weren't two words that got put together. We were just starting, I'm not that old, but we were just starting to talk about how gender might impact the way people respond to care. Nobody's talking about anything else. We have come, fortunately, a very long way. But I do think that we want to kind of start with what does that even mean to people? So we've got validating, individualized, trust is an important thing, respectful. Good. Anything else? I think dignity is big. What about you, Lindsay and Andrea? When you think of that, when you hear that, what does that mean to you guys?
Respect was the first word that came to mind, because if you respect someone, then you're meeting them where they're at, you're seeing them, you're hearing them. So respect is, I think, first and foremost.
I think for me, life-saving, if you put a hyphen between them, counts. I think talking through our trust and respect, all of those things are really about creating a situation where we can save lives. It may seem insignificant unless you've lived it, but true and authentic, culturally informed care and culturally affirming care can be a suicide prevention method when you live in the margins so far.
Yeah. So when we think about that, Andrea, I'm wondering if you could share a time with us when culturally affirming care made a big difference for you, or when its absence made a big difference for you. If you have any examples of what the impact of that might have on someone.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I think, I've been out of the military for almost 20 years. That's really hard to say, but it's been a while. And it took me a number of years to get over compartmentalizing my identity because I served during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So the entirety of that time was hiding a big part of who I was. And so when I got out, I didn't realize I was still doing that, but it was with my veteran identity. So it took me almost 2.5, almost 3 years to get the care I desperately needed. I did not have a very good transition out of the military. I think when you join at 18, and you're given your identity, you're told who you are. You have the uniform you put on, it has your name, you're given a rank, that's who you are. And I mean, if I'm being honest, there's some comfort in that because during your formative years of your 20s, if you're already told who you are, you don't have to do that hard identity work. And I was forced to tuck a big part of who I was away. But then when I got out, I was still doing that and I still wasn't accessing the care that I needed. And then it took actually a college professor of mine who saw me withdrawing in class. Like I was really I was severely depressed, really struggling with adjusting and whatnot. And he was a veteran himself, and he was the one that convinced me to go into care. But when I went into care, like at the time, there were no women veteran program managers, there were no LGBTQ veteran care coordinators at the VA. And so I couldn't even get basic reproductive health care at the time, except for once a month when a women's health nurse practitioner would travel to the clinic that I was going to. Now, I was in college. That access was not very good. If I had one day out of the month that I could get basic women's wellness kind of care. And it really, I mean, what it taught me, I mean, so this is just as a women veteran, let alone a queer woman veteran. Like it's like if I can't even access this, I definitely can't access that. And so it really just it was hard because it didn't feel like a place for me. Like it didn't feel like I could really be seen for exactly who I was and show up fully in the ways that I wasn't able to show up fully in the military. I still didn't feel like I could do that in my healthcare setting. And this was, like I said, back in the early like 2009, 2010, like somewhere around there. And so things have improved at the VA as far as reproductive health and having designated women's health providers and a women veteran program manager and whatnot. But it's still, having served in that role and in both of those roles, it's the system itself. You have very good people working in a system that doesn't always provide avenues for the gender affirming care that's needed, or even culturally competent care. So it's a real struggle to have good people working in a challenging system. But it took me years to fully trust that I could be open and honest about my needs. And if you can't be open and honest about your needs, how do you expect someone on the other side to meet them? Because they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what you're not saying, and you're not saying it because they're not asking either.
Right. Right. And I think probably for a long time we don't train healthcare providers that well, or we certainly didn't used to. As I just said, I was trained a long time ago, and I was never trained to know what to ask, to ask anything about ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity. Like those were not things that healthcare providers even thought about as relevant to care, which clearly we've learned that they're incredibly relevant to care. I think your experience just speaks to that. Not being open about what you needed, not being able to communicate all of your needs is problematic when you go in for healthcare. Lindsay, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, we had this really great conversation last week and started to talk about what actually beyond paperwork and trying to get people's pronouns correct and using names that people want to be called. But beyond that, what does sort of human-centered affirming care look like? Like, what can providers actually implement? What do they need to be thinking about?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think most people don't quite understand that gender affirming care is a broad spectrum. Gender affirming care isn't just specifically hormones. It's not specifically, gender affirming surgeries. It's actually a complex system of things that you can do to be informed on this effort. So gender affirming care starts from how do you address people? How do you talk to people? How do you understand who they are? Because, Carrie, to your point about like, we didn't really talk about this, but we also nobody knew that this was a part of the puzzle that we definitely needed to be able to provide better care. So first and foremost, it's how do you address a person? We don't make assumptions about who people are. We ask who they are. How do we, appropriately address somebody? Well, ask somebody, what's the best way for me to address you? And really trying hard to get it right from the jump. I think that gender affirming care is being a preventative or preemptive thing. You don't often do proper gender affirming care after you've already broken that trust with somebody. So some of these things are about building trust and building up that muscle right away. So, how do I address somebody? When you're in a waiting room, you probably don't need to use Mr. or Mrs. You don't need to use ma'am or sir. You can just address somebody by their first name. And actually, a lot of people really benefit from that. We talk, about how not using Miss or Mr. or asking somebody if they're the veteran actually improves women veteran outcomes as well, because a lot of women veterans are either assumed to be the spouse or they're assumed to be a dude. And so really like being able to properly address somebody and saying, I'm looking for Lindsay Church, like it really actually is a mind-boggling thing, but it really is such a small thing that we can do to make people feel safer, or that they're not at least erased from the job. And so starting there, I talked a lot about being able to navigate buildings in order to get to the clinic, in order to get to the doctor. There are 7 places that we can fail, but right before they even get to you, about where people can find them, because people trust thought and information. If somebody has thought of this, then I start to think that maybe I'm going to be safer there. So you can make a giant sign that says this bathroom is for all. You can, I've seen even in places like in Congress, people the member themselves will say, you can use my bathroom. So like, should there be a time where you don't have the gender neutral options, giving people the information that they can use the facilities here, there, and here are the places. Those are all safety factors. I've been harassed a number of times in bathrooms, including by staff members. And so that particularly has actually broken most of my trust with VA, that I can navigate a building. I don't go to the bathroom there anymore. And so like those things can really break trust, but they also leave lasting scars for people when they try to navigate these healthcare settings. So, properly marking all of those things, but also giving people information about how can I pursue if I'm harassed or discriminated against, how can I get that accountability and systemic accountability from that agency or that organization. So properly marking discrimination, policies and procedures. Who can I call really does actually set up a safer environment for everybody, not just me, not just Andrea, but folks that are, are harassed based off their race or ethnicity, folks that are harassed based off of their visible minority status have an opportunity too to use those discrimination protections. So you set up this kind of better environment for all. As an individual, you can welcome that person by saying, "Hi, my name is Carrie Rogers. I use she, her pronouns. What about you? How can I, properly address you?" Learning about some of these like triggering questions. I have been asked a million times for a pregnancy test, and like, it's just such a deadpan thing that like I'm queer. I don't have like any, unless an immaculate conception is happening. I'm not pregnant. And so like, even having cultural competency around that can help better outcomes. Like even saying, I hear you, I understand. There are some legal things that I have to navigate here. I want to make sure that you feel affirmed. There's very little. Andrew, you're about to come off me. Tell me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge one because, having worked in a system that had a lot of constraints, and there
Mhm.
were things that people like the electronic medical record, like if there's no room for modification, or if it takes a lengthy process to change anything on it, if you know that, be forthcoming about it, so that, because I want to know that that you're not just pretending it doesn't exist. And if you, that just goes a long way towards building trust, and that trust is imperative.
Yeah, I mean, the number of times that this has happened is a lot, just because this is like a legal requirement. But like the number of people that come up and are just like, I get it. I'm really sorry that this is happening. We've been working on trying to fix it. We're doing the best that we can on our front. I was still actually need to go. And so like, it's okay to have some of these things that we know like are triggers, but also understanding at those points is really important to building that trust, even if you have to do it. And so those types of things, like really just having a unique understanding and hearing from your patients. And if your patient says something that is significant, such as "I'm queer and I don't have any possibility of becoming pregnant," then having that conversation with them about how I hear you and affirming them. Most of what gender affirming care really is, especially for trans people, is like just affirming the identities that they're living in, the bodies that they exist in, and believing them and following their lead. A lot of it really truly is about following the lead of your patient, listening to them, hearing them, understanding, and doing the best that you can to give them a safe environment in which they can tell you who they are and what their needs are. The other part that you can control is how do you hand people off? Because there is a time when you're not going to be the doctor of record, or you're not going to be the person that's providing that care. How do you make sure that from the time that they go from you, who is culturally informed and trying very hard, that they're not passed to somebody with no ability to help them? Like if you have to point them to the endocrinologist, point them to the endocrinologist that specializes in gender affirming care because you know that. Point them and do that warm handoff, because most people like myself, we fall through the strainer real fast. We fall through the trust of the, like think of it as a strainer. The person that falls through it if you don't do the job of actually making sure that we don't fall out. So the trust is so thin, it's paper thin. And when we move people from one person to the other, that paper can easily break. So I won't keep going from there. There's a long answer for what gender affirming care is, but it's
No,
everything.
that's okay. It is. It's really important. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking as you're talking, I used to use Mr. and Ms. I never used Mrs., but Mr. and Ms. all the time because I was taught that that was the respectful way to address people, and I didn't want to use people's first names because of informality, right? Like I had that sort of, and often sort of after the first couple of appointments, I always used my first name with anybody I took care of after the initial appointment. And so that usually switched really quickly. But now I'm looking back on that going, oh, yeah, that was a miss. I didn't have any idea that it was a miss in that way at the time that I was doing it. But wow, that was a
No,
miss.
but I will say, like in this military veteran community, there's a lot of folks that I've heard a lot of pushback, especially from people that do kind of frontline work that get yelled at by officers a lot, especially men officers who demand to be called sir. So I will say that there's unique challenges in the veteran community. I will also say, like, the most respectful thing that you can do is not create a barrier between you and your patient. So even if that person, so say that former general does want to be called sir, in that conversation that we talked about, how do you prefer to be addressed? And you can
Yeah,
actually ask that question, like, I prefer to be heard called sir. Like, that's great. That's your preference. And it's
right.
not everybody. So it's personal. It's a personal preference. And there's ways around it. So
Yeah,
And I just wish we could expand what constitutes gender affirming care in our minds, because it's not just for trans people. It's everybody accesses gender affirming care on a routine basis, and we don't think of it as that. We don't think of a breast form post mastectomy for a cisgender woman as gender affirming care. I mean, when I was
oh,
in women's
Andrea, we're
health,
going to get on a conversation about hormone replacement therapy. So good. It's going to be fun. I'm ready for
well,
it.
when I was in women's health, like when I was working in that field, there were so many women that were in that were menopausal, that had a lot, or had PCOS, and that had hair growth, and that was devastating to them. I mean, I heard language, I don't feel like a woman anymore. I feel, that providing care to address that is gender affirming care.
And the largest reform, like so people often think of it as like this is a transgender issue, and it's absolutely much more broad than that. The largest recipients of hormone replacement therapy, which is the form of care that everybody thinks of as gender affirming care, is actually menopausal women. It's men with low testosterone and menopausal women, and it's actually gender affirming care for the treatment of gender dysphoria was not created for us, nor will the providers be specialized in this particular field all the time. You're going to get an endocrinologist if you're going for gender affirming care for hormone replacement therapy for a trans person. It's going to be the same endocrinologist that a woman veteran would see and that a male veteran would see. So like what we think of it is like, because with so much discrimination has been pointed directly at transgender people, we forget that when we make these systems and services better for the people that live in the furthest margins, that it gets better for everyone. We're going to have a great conversation. I'm very excited about it.
well, I'm sitting here thinking, and you guys can take it wherever you want to take it, but I'm sitting here thinking about, Andrea, what you said when you first started speaking today. You really were talking about your experiences as a woman veteran. And I'm thinking about sort of this idea of intersectionality, right? And we're not just one thing, right? But age plays a role in inclusive and safe care and dignity. Sexual orientation, gender identity, ethnicity plays a role. And I know Lindsay MVA does a lot of work with multiple sort of groups, not just LGBTQIA identifying folks, right? And so religion plays a role. Can you guys talk about how navigating all of those things? I think so. I've sort of outed my age, but like I grew up, by the way, I grew up in Kansas in the 80s. Different world, right? The idea of those things impacting healthcare was not something that, was part of that reality in that space, in that time. And so I think that navigating all of that can feel overwhelming to providers who maybe don't see themselves in marginalized groups. I think the healthcare profession is becoming more and more diverse, but it's still not the most diverse sort of profession. Can you talk a little bit about how healthcare providers can navigate all of that, or how to sort of feel less overwhelmed and sort of throw your hands up? I've seen a lot of that. I'm like, I just can't. I don't know what to do. I'm overwhelmed.
So I'll kick us off, and Andrea, just jump in whenever you're ready. I want to change the framing for people.
Great.
I think there's this broad like misunderstanding about how affirming care should or could look like. People have a lot of shoulds about how it should look. You should be perfect. I have a lot of coulds. When I think about the way that the framing where you're talking about just a second ago, like how these identities impact healthcare, I actually want to flip that on its head and say how these identities inform healthcare. Because the better that you get at them, the better providing you can do. So it's
Yeah.
not actually a race to perfection, it's an ongoing practice. And so when I think about culturally affirming care, it's taking the trainings that you can, learning as much as you can on your own, listening to your patients as much as possible. But what I like to think about is that it's not just the impact that it has on me, it's helping you provide better care because you're more informed about what these unique identities mean. So like on the front of age, and because we're talking about LGBTQ populations, how do these what are the intersections here? A lot of LGBTQ people lose their family early on because we come out, there's not a lot of support, and a lot of people, especially if you came out young or like in prior to probably 2012 or so,
In
like I feel like
Kansas
there's a
in the
lot.
80s, right? Like,
Yeah, like if you came out earlier than 2010, you probably have a rift with at least one or two of your family members if you didn't
yeah.
lose everybody altogether. Coming out was a very different experience, which means that this like aging population, the silver generation that's coming to us, is also losing and missing family. So when you think about healthcare, who's going to take them to surgery? Who's going to pick them up from surgery? Who's going to make sure that they have a house to live in? Are they going to find a veterans home and eventually be able to be the only LGBTQ person in that aging facility? All of these things have unique impacts, but also like can help to inform you. So say that you're providing, housing services to an aging LGBTQ veteran. You're going to look for a population, or you're going to look for resources that will serve that LGBTQ population just as much as that vet population. If you know that a person is more likely to have less family support and less like economic and socioeconomic earnings in their lifetime, you might point them to SAGE instead of the veterans home. And so thinking through how can I get better informed, not how can I get perfect here, because nobody expects perfection, but there is a light bulb moment at every training that you take, right? That most people don't know that Black women are the least likely to be believed in their pain scales.
Yeah.
Oftentimes deprived of pain medications and pain management treatments that would likely save their life and at a minimum improve their quality of life. When you learn that and you have a person in front of you that has experienced that barrier, you provide care so much differently. And there's an aha moment in almost every training. If you're looking for it, even if it's one that you've already done, there's always an aha moment. And it will change and inform you on how to better provide care. And so we have to kind of flip this on its head and stop thinking about this perfection model and really start to think about how can I just get better and how can I get stronger in my providing of care, not how can
I think what you point to is having humility, having some knowing what you don't know, and being a lifelong learner, because medicine changes constantly. New technologies happen, new therapies, new modalities, all these things are constantly evolving. And if you don't evolve with it, then it's going to affect your practice.
So it sounds like some of it is also, I love this idea of humility in it. PsychArmor, we talk about cultural humility all the time. I always worry about people feeling like they know, like, oh, I read a pamphlet, so I'm good, right? So really sort of having that mindset to say, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I might get some things wrong. Please let me know. This is a journey that we're in together. What else do I need to know about serving you? That in and of itself, just really always remembering that there are going to be things that you don't know.
Well, and also with every body that is in front of you, like that body, like that person has lived in it their whole life. Like you have gotten training on the general sense of how bodies work, but not how that one does, and not the experiences that body in front of you has gone through. So I think it is a collaboration all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to say, there's a famous saying, when you've met one veteran, you've met one veteran. Yeah. And every person that you provide care to is going to be different. And all of these things are pieces of puzzles that will help you better do that, right? No one moment or no one training is going to unlock the perfection model. However, everything is about really fine tuning those skills so that you can be the best provider that you can. That's what's like, ongoing training or mandatory, like ECEUs. This is why we have them, is to make sure that people continue to sharpen those skills and get better at providing this care, especially as it evolves and changes.
So we have a question. Is there a toolkit with recommendations for providers on where we can start, things to change in our process, language, spaces to start? This is a big question. Thank you to whoever put this in. You gave this a lot of thought. Spaces to start improving our gender-affirming care.
I'm going to drop a link in the type answer option.
Yeah.
This is the basic I'm going to call it basic training. It was a training that we did earlier this year on like gender minority veterans, talking about women veterans and transgender and non-binary folks.
I was at that training.
I was like, Andrew, you're smiling because I think you were there.
That was the one. Yep.
So I just dropped a link. You can go in there and look at that at any time. There's like just a lot of practical solutions about how to do this from every level of your understanding. So like there's something in there for everybody, whether it be beginners, intermediate, and advanced. So if that's helpful, it's got some things about setting up your spaces and talking to your clients, building that trust that you might need, as well as some examples of marginalization and disparate policies that might have impact your person's kind of abused experience.
And I would also recommend, connect with your local LGBTQ organizations. Every state just about has some organization that works it. And so they often have a lot of resources and educators as well.
Great.
I'll also plug that PsychArmor did some stuff recently last year or so.
Yeah.
So it'd be a good place to start.
Well, and we can absolutely PsychArmor, our PsychArmor friends who are helping us with the technology here can drop that link into PsychArmor has been doing some work on this. Showing up to something like this is also very important. So you're ahead of the game if you're here. And asking questions is also incredibly important.
I'm also going to find the link to our training program. We do trainings pretty regularly especially as the policies are changing a lot right now. So I'll drop the training link here in a minute. The Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs also has been doing a really great job of doing some trainings on stuff around DEI. My favorite is that they're just doing it anyways. So keep an eye out, look for the Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs training program. They've been doing a lot of stuff and they keep recordings afterwards. So all of these are really great, real-time changing, like NVA does a lot of training on how the policies are changing and what that means for folks as they transition out of the military and as they're trying to access care. So keep an eye out on some of those other opportunities for training. All of them are free. So just wherever you can jump in.
Yeah, I have a question that I wanted to ask you guys about health disparities. But it also just popped into my head because things sometimes do. That we have talked both last week, Lindsay, we talked about this a little bit, but also we've talked offline about this a little bit about the need for community providers to be ready to begin to serve the LGBTQ plus IA or LGBTQIA plus community a little bit more now than ever because of some of the things that are happening in the world, including folks being required to leave service last week. And so I wonder if you guys want to talk, just an awareness thing. If you want to mention a little bit part of why this is so timely and so important, and why I want to, again, thank Humana for their partnership and for everybody for showing up for this. There's a need that before, when we were planning this, wasn't happening in the world, and that there's a need now more than ever for people to be thoughtful about this.
Well, I can speak from experience because most of my career was dedicated to LGBTQ veteran advocacy work. And within and within the VA system and outside of it. And there were some really big strides that had been made, and they were moving in that direction. And a lot of it is gone. A lot of the trainings have been pulled, the language has been scrubbed. The you used to be able to walk into a lot of VA facilities and see signs of inclusion, and those are not there anymore. But the access to care is also not there for certain parts of the LGBTQ population, transgender veterans specifically. And so it puts, for someone in my position who is working for state government as like in a central coordinating agency, all of the referral network that I used to have, that I've built over the years, in making those relationships and stuff, those are not reliable anymore. And so where to send veterans who are needing this type of care is a challenge in ways that it never used to be. And so it is going to be up to the community, because a lot of times community providers would hear someone's a veteran and it was almost like a knee-jerk reaction to refer to the VA. Well, the VA takes care of veterans. Well, not all veterans qualify for the VA
Right.
or are eligible. Not all veterans want to go to the VA, and they have a right to not go to the VA. So they still have a right to health care. And so that really, I mean, I can't stress how important it is for community providers to also be competent on providing military care to military connected individuals. Because a lot of what I used to do in previous roles was I wanted to make veteran spaces more LGBTQIA friendly, and then making LGBTQ spaces more veteran friendly, understanding that they have military connected folks in that community too, because really both of them are populations that exist in every community. So when this notion that there is like this one veteran community or this one LGBTQ community, like that's a misnomer, because they are populations that exist in all communities.
Mhm.
So really understand that. Like, one of the things I ask in every single training I've ever done is, what does a veteran look like? Because it immediately has people confront their bias. Because even on this call, I guarantee if I ask that question, everybody has this middle-aged white Vietnam era veteran with the hat and the patches and stuff, like visible identifiers that he is a veteran. And yet nobody, you heard in the call that you have two veterans in this webinar, and yet nobody's thinking of me or Lindsay when they have that image of what a veteran looks like in their head. So really understanding that population, both the LGBTQIA plus population and the veteran population, are incredibly diverse. So people thinking they don't know someone in either is likely not true. And so I think, just recognizing that they exist, and just like you would build your knowledge base on issues affecting the LGBTQIA population, it's also imperative to do the same with the veteran population and military, understanding military health. I know there's a lot in both that you can, there's information no matter what you're studying that is expansive. So you can never learn every single thing you'll ever need to know, but to have a good baseline to work with and consistently expose yourself to different information and knowledge and trainings is really vital.
After meeting thousands of veterans, because of all the marketing, mine's still a high and tight post 9/11 veteran, white man veteran in my head. Can't help it. The marketing still like says the same things. So very close, but not quite exactly, but same idea. I will take this on two fronts about what the moment that we're in. So one, so when we started this partnership with PsychArmor, it was in a moment of we're in deep despair here. We've got a lot of really deep challenges. We're basically living in the crosshairs of our own government, and we have to figure out how do we continue to provide life-saving, affirming care in whatever ways that we can, even if it means, trying to find ways that we can train providers that aren't within the VA structures. It's challenging to do this work right now because there are so many attacks against the communities that we serve. And so first and foremost, from the front of, transgender veteran service members, first and foremost, transgender service members are living under a moment in time where they have to either choose to voluntarily, quote, I call it a coerced separation. It's not voluntary. Folks do not want to leave the military, but are faced with the choice of voluntarily separating and identifying themselves now to, make sure that they don't have to pay back bonuses. They're supposed to get extra pay from this, which is a lie. It's all a mess. But they, rather than being rooted out from the military, which is the phase that we're in now, the June 6th deadline was to voluntarily identify yourself and start a process for getting out of the military. From June 7th on, there's what's called an involuntary separation period, which means that service members, if they are found out to be transgender, they will be separated as well. They will lose certain benefits that they would have gotten if they were voluntary. But we also don't know much about the discharge characterizations, if they're going to say that these are not honorable discharges or that they're general and honorable conditions, which would change their access to VA benefits. In addition, they're being given a discharge code, which most people don't know about on your DD-214. You have your honorable, dishonorable, all of those things. But there's also a code that goes on your DD-214 that talks about what your conditions were at separation. Right now, service members who are enlisted are being given a code called JFF, which is a secretarial authority, which means that they could be given an honorable discharge, or the secretary has the authority to give them general under honorable conditions. So they will be waiting for their separation period to figure out if they're going to be given general under honorable conditions, which change their access to things like their post 9/11 GI Bill, access to home loans, things like that, or if they're going to be given a code that would just allow them to separate under what is not normal conditions, but something that doesn't affect their future benefits. Officers, on the other hand, are given a code that's called JDK, and that code means that they are a threat to national security. Nobody understands why. They have the opportunity to quote unquote fight it. They won't win it because this is what they want. This will not impact their ability to get VA benefits, but a lot of people stay in the defense industry and need security clearances. Those JDK codes will impact whether or not they're able to get a security clearance and continue to do anything related to the Department of Defense. For a lot of people, this is absolutely heartbreaking. They've spent their whole lives trying to build up their careers and work in the intelligence fields. I was a linguist. I knew a lot of people that went from being a CTI and going directly into a contracting agency, and they needed that top secret clearance. If you're labeled JDK, you will be unemployable by the defense sector largely. And so this is a really deep level of trauma. I will say that we intervened in somebody's suicide this weekend or last weekend, trying to end it because they didn't see a future where they would be able to continue to do the work that they wanted to do, and that their life had no options or meaning. We are in a moment where there is going to be a lot of those moments where we are going to be intervening in really deep crisis. People don't often see themselves without the uniform on and being forcibly removed from the military in a very abrupt way, being characterized as national security threats. All of these things are going to harm our community, and they already are. And now the other part of this is that they are also cutting off all gender affirming care on base, which means that if you are in the military and you're entitled to continue your gender affirming care, especially your hormone replacement therapy, they're pushing people out into the civilian sector and saying the Department of Defense doesn't provide this care. That means that the civilian sector has to catch these folks in places across the country. That's you. You are the folks that will catch those service members that need access to that care and be the large providers of the service members getting access to hormones. On the VA side, things have gotten really bad really fast. The secretary is a very cruel man who has enacted or taken away and rescinded benefits from our community that are absolutely crucial to our ability to even walk into a VA facility. Prior to this administration, there was a directive called BHA Directive 1341. That directive was a directive that told people these are what types of care we will provide. These are the community standards that we will operate under. And it provided discrimination protection. So that if we were harassed on campus, or if we were not treated with, their appropriate pronouns, or, people will use dead names because they're kind of jerks sometimes. We had access to being able to hold them accountable and the system accountable to do better by us. when the memo was rescinded, but 1341 was rescinded writ large. Basically, they said that we cannot tailor this memo or directive to be able to fit with the executive order on gender ideology, and so therefore it is rescinded in full. And so when the secretary came out with his decision, he called all hormone replacement therapy for transgender veterans cross-sex hormone therapy. He made it stigmatizing. He made it so that our care was different. Our care actually is not different, per Andrew and I's conversation earlier. Hormone replacement therapy is a standard of care that we offer for many different conditions, ranging from menopause to low testosterone to gender dysphoria. Basically, what the VA has now said is that it's not that we don't provide this care, it's that we don't care if gender dysphoria is treated here. In fact, we would prefer that you go elsewhere. Now, they say that this won't impact care. Transgender veterans can continue to access their care. We can continue to see doctors, dentists, all of the things that we're entitled to. And I will tell you that when you are worried about being harassed in a facility, you often will not go. This is going to and is already resulting in delayed, denied, and completely skipped care altogether. This means that things like preventative maintenance and things like going to a primary care are going to be pushed and pushed and pushed to the point where most of our community will experience mental or physical health crisis before they actually come to a VA. All of this is couched in budgets and saving money, but ultimately, crisis intervention costs far more than any gender affirming care that will cost the VA or cost any institution. And so this makes this civilian community and providers so imperative to people like me being able to access any level of care, because I'm scared to go to the VA, and I run a national nonprofit that tells people don't be scared to go to the VA. If people like me are afraid of being harassed and discriminated against, then what does it mean for somebody who doesn't have any level of accountability or visibility that makes it hard for you to do that too? And so this moment has never been more important. What we do here will last for generations, and how we shore up this care and learn more about our community will save lives and does every day.
So I brought that up because it really seems to me like when you have folks coming into community care at higher rates, whether they're leaving VA or they're leaving DOD, this context is an important part of the care that we provide. Understanding that this context is needs to be at least acknowledged, as people are, some of them shifting healthcare providers that they've had for a really long time, or feel like they're living in an environment that, they thought that they were not, that they were done with. I mean, you both mentioned that you served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That the current climate may be impacting the way that you feel about your own service, may be bringing up things that, and I'm making assumptions, and I'm not asking you necessarily for personal details, but I do kind of feel like this may be showing up for other people. Oh, I don't feel as good about my service as I did a year ago, and this is impacting me. And it's important for healthcare providers to be aware of the context in which people are living and working.
I think you're really spot on. It is incredibly challenging to see similar, like I know some of those codes were the same codes that were used during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and it made it incredibly difficult because if there's like an administrative discharge that doesn't say anything about being queer, being trans, being whatever, then how do you, what's the marker for how to prove that caused trauma, that was something that would qualify to get that discharge upgraded? Like it becomes very challenging, and I can say from personal experience, just it's been hard because I just left the federal service in January. And now I applied for the job I'm in now in October because an opportunity presented itself that I couldn't pass up. And it was getting to do some of the work that I was really passionate about in a more impactful way, being over like the whole state and feeling like I can really make a difference in working for good people that in a smaller organization. And so I made that decision long before like things changed. and to see the work that you dedicated your career towards just be dismantled. And to know that for 3 years, especially like the last 3 years, I worked in suicide prevention, and I really centered underserved veteran populations in that work. And to go around and tell people to go to an organization that I would not, I have a hard time saying that you will be safe there, because all of the changes, all of the policy changes, all of the climate itself is it's not one that I would feel comfortable saying that. And so how do I not feel like I was lying to people? I mean, you know what you know at the time, and you do the best with the information you have at the time, but it's like it's hard to look back and think, well, like I put my own reputation on the line by standing by these words that don't exist anymore. Like that this environment that I told them to go to doesn't exist anymore. So that caused a lot, like, and then just the survivor's guilt. I swear I named it that because that's what it felt like, because I'm listening to so many people. I knew a lot of employees that identified as part of the LGBTQIA community. I knew a lot of veterans I would see time to time that would constantly, that I might have helped years ago, that would just stop by when they saw me and stuff and say hi. It's like knowing that it's completely different, and that all of those years that you dedicated towards improving, things for your own community, like that is no more. There's a lot of grief.
Yeah. Well, I do think that is, that's part of why we wanted to do this, because the community is going to be hopefully picking up well some of this. Some folks who served honorably and who deserve deserve that their health care be attended to. And so I'm really happy that the folks who came today have been here with us and are so open to this. We did get one.
Yeah, I was about to ask, can I answer this question real quick?
Yeah.
So the question about dead name. So dead name is often referred to as a person's name that they were given at birth. A person will, sometimes the folks will change their name, whether it be legally or culturally. So when somebody tells you their name, sometimes they'll, especially at VA, if you're using any VA stuff, VA has been recently updating people's gender markers to their sex at birth. They've also been changing names back to the names that you served under. So there might be times where you get a referral from VA as a person's dead name. And if a person says, that's my dead name, there probably is a paperwork issue, but be very, very cognizant and very careful about how you address that person. Make sure that you get their name that they want to be addressed by. The other thing that you can do to build trust should this happen to you is updating their records to make sure that they know that you're working towards removing their dead name from things, and really working towards that, building that trust, because what will happen, it's not your fault because VA is doing this automatically. Sometimes this will happen, but really truly trying to make repair for when that does happen. Asking people's, like, what is the name that you want to be addressed by? Let's make sure that we get it updated in the system so that it doesn't happen again. And then following through and making sure that it actually does happen.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I really appreciate you seeing the question. I saw it too, and I wanted to make sure we got to it. We will be doing this again in a couple weeks. So we would love to have folks join us and come back. We're also going to put in the chat, there's a type form. We're also going to put a QR code on the screen. We would love to hear your feedback about our conversation today. Like I said, it's one of a series, and we make changes and we make adjustments based on your feedback. So we want to hear from you how this went and how we can make it more helpful, if there's a way that we can do that. We really appreciate everybody being here. I want to thank Andrea and Lindsay for taking their time to be with us today. We will see you again soon. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.